Do you have any pieces of media that you hold dearly but have a hard time explaining when asked? Not even because its content is especially difficult, but because its premise doesn't really lend itself to summary. I feel like this happens to me all the time, mostly because some of my favorite pieces of media are small, character-driven, and kind of boring, where the appeal lies just as much with the spaces in between as it does what actually happens in front of you. Slice of life manga and anime have this problem, though usually you can at least say slice of life at a rich kid's school, slice of life about a single father and his daughter who bond through cooking, or even slice of life where they're otaku. Perhaps the shining example of a series you can't do that with is a little manga from 1997 called Sing Yesterday for Me. Oh no, there's an anime. Uh-oh, I haven't seen it. I read the manga before I even knew there was an anime. I don't know if the anime is good or not. You tell me. Oh no. I really don't know that it's possible to summarize this thing, at least not in a way that feels satisfactory. Even its title is only half accurate. If I say, yeah, it's about a love triangle, that criminally undersells it. If I tell you it's about a guy working a dead-end job who meets a mysterious girl with a pet crow, that oversells it. It makes mysterious the operative word, and that's not right. If I tell you it's about grief, regret, and finding your place in the world, that makes it sound far more somber and heady than it is. So the best course of action is to explain not what it's about, but who it's about. The protagonist of Sing Yesterday for Me is Rikuo, a recent college graduate that's found himself working a dead-end entry-level position at a convenience store. Thing is, he's content to do so. He never developed the aspiration to dedicate himself to something like his peers did, aside from having a photography hobby. With that direction, he's fine to live day by day, biking from his cluttered, messy apartment to his uneventful job and seeing friends every now and again on days off. That is, until one day, when he runs into the aforementioned mysterious girl with the aforementioned pet crow. Shortly after, the woman he had feelings for in college moves back to their town. Then, his life becomes marginally more eventful. The girl with the crow, Haru, is kind of a dirtbag trash child, but we love her for it. She's an 18-year-old high school dropout working at a hostess bar with a coy, playful disposition. She wears all black because black is cool. Most of her time outside work is spent wandering aimlessly around town with said crow, Kansuke, trying to be an enigma, but mostly just being a little gremlin woman. I love her. She initially comes off like a manic pixie dream girl, but she's got an abundance of interiority that exists wholly outside of Rikuo, so it's chill. Rikuo's college friend is a woman named Shinako, who works as a high school teacher. Though she appears at the onset to be the most put together of the cast, it becomes apparent that the forward momentum that got her where she is stemmed from a complex response to a loss she suffered in her past. That loss also affected Rui, a student at the high school Shinako teaches at, and the younger brother of her dearest childhood friend. See, it was that childhood friend, Yu, who died of complications with a lifelong illness a few years prior, leaving both Shinako and Rui with holes in their hearts only the other can understand. Rui comes off like a troublemaker, but what keeps him from straying down the path of delinquency are his passion for art and Shinako's presence in his life. This has led him to develop feelings for her, though she herself still has feelings for his older brother. Rikuo also has feelings for Shinako, as Haru does Rikuo, but it's not quite that simple. What normally fuels romance manga is the will they won't they, which often boils down to characters being unable to communicate clearly with one another, usually for arbitrary reasons. In Sing Yesterday for Me, however, the cast communicate refreshingly clearly. While Rikuo is kind of a sloppy, almost needy dude when the story starts out, and as such it seems weird to consider that these two cutie girls have any degree of romantic inclination toward him, as things develop you start to see what they see in him. Chiefly among those reasons is that he's an adorably open book. He just can't help but wear his emotions on his sleeve, and this is part of why Rikuo opens up to Shinako about those feelings almost immediately. In turn, as does everyone to everyone else, all the way down to Haru telling Shinako that she herself has feelings for Rikuo, just to make sure they're all on the same page about their intentions. The jealousy is kept to a minimum as well, with everyone retaining mostly friendly relationships where lesser manga would birth rivalries. It's super refreshing. What keeps their dynamics growing and shifting, though, is that much of what they're communicating to one another is that their feelings aren't yet concrete. In some instances, this is because the shape they've taken is relatively new, but often it's because the past is obscuring everyone's path forward. This is, of course, the yesterday we're singing about. As mentioned, Shinako is unable to fully let go of her feelings toward Rui's brother, and acknowledges that if she could potentially requite Rikuo's feelings. However, there's a nagging part of her that wishes she could just forget about him altogether, to move on wholesale without meaningfully resolving her grief. Rikuo doesn't see this at first. He never learns about the side of Shinako until Rui tells him. Instead, he sees Shinako in part as an amalgamation of many of the things he wishes he could be. She's along her career trajectory, she knows what she wants, she has that ever-luring drive. The yesterday Rikuo is stuck in is both his prolonged inability to set himself on any clear path and his feelings towards Shinako. Haru has no singular hang-up, but rather many small ones. Feelings of inadequacy, low self-esteem, a difficult relationship to an absentee father, all built up the wall of ironic detachment she puts up to keep others from looking too directly into her soul. With a character like Haru in a manga like this, you kind of expect that she's got a strained relationship with an uptight family, but her relationship to her mom and later her grandmother is touching and human. She and her mom are similar people. They view one another as equals, lending to a relationship that outsiders see as strange, but that, while still believably messy in its own ways, is far healthier than it could be any other way. Still, that relationship in its own way causes friction with her pre-existing struggles in ways that aren't really anybody's fault, but that weigh on Haru nonetheless. The past is a deeply interwoven tapestry, one that must be disassembled thread by thread over a period of months, years. Yesterday, in Sing Yesterday for me, is not a better place. It's not a warm embrace, but a perpetually cracked window letting in frigid winter air each night. Yesterday is something you live with, something you carry with you silently. Wow, and that's just in the first 12 chapters. That's barely 2 volumes. Talk about bang for your buck. Buy it now! Oh, it's never been officially licensed in the West. The only scanlation available for the first few volumes is kind of artifacty and not exceptionally translated, so sorry about the less than stellar picture quality on this video. I certainly have no issue with the scanlation as is, aside from it being a little confusing in how it uses the word dump to mean rejection rather than to break up. It's worded clumsily, but there are still nuggets of prosaic gold within, as the characters, like recent college grads would, openly philosophize to and amongst one another. Any imperfections that crop up in those early chapters only feels more human, because, well, humans are imperfect. Those first 12 chapters are an absolute tonal masterstroke, but admittedly, it suffers from some serious growing pains before balancing itself out. Once it establishes both its main cast and a status quo, there's a pretty grueling 4-chapter arc that purges all of the things I dislike about most romance manga. Following that is a process of introducing the tertiary cast, which drags the pace down to a crawl. Around the time Rikuo's convenience store co-worker's little sister who goes to school with Rui gets a part-time job at Haru's bar, I came really close to tapping out. From that point forward, though it's hardly uneventful, the series shifts focus from the vivid melancholy and extrapolation of its most important characters' relationships, and thus loses focus on its greatest strengths. Though it builds to a pretty satisfying final 10 chapters that, if textually somewhat cliché, contain some of the manga's most mature writing. It's still pretty weird to see the cast silently go from a world of cassette tapes and CDs to everyone having smartphones while still being in their mid-20s is a real life 18 years past, though. Author Kei Tomei is a rare, cool example of a seinen mangaka who's also a woman. Other examples include Fumiko Fumi, Kyu Hayashida, Yutsuko Chusonji, Takako Shimura, and Yuki Urashibara. I find this blend of demographic and perspective births some of the most interesting and underrated manga out there, but what makes them distinct from both josei and male-written seinen? Keep in mind, this is purely what I've observed. It's not even that their female characters are any less objectified or any more likely to be protagonists, are necessarily better or more accurately written. There's plenty of male-led seinen that ticks those boxes. Rather, the clearest distinction seems to be scale. They're quieter, softer, stay within an established cast of characters but flesh them out nearly equally, dissipating the very concept of a protagonist they initially follow only out of obligation. With that, the pacing tends to be more lax. Kei Tomei's art, her paneling in particular, breathes deeply the nostalgic melancholy between the spaces it creates. To read her manga is to allow yourself to hold on each beat for as long as feels right, as its characters pause, drift off, change direction, and trying to express themselves to one another. The early chapters of Sing Yesterday for me feel like memories. Time passes indiscriminately between them, though they're easily plucked out of a shelf to reminisce on. What further adds to the communicative realism are her down-to-earth yet instantly recognizable character designs. Rui's safety pin earring, Shinako's eyebrows, and Haru's hair and wardrobe feel like details that stand out to you about people you used to know. My friend Max called Sing Yesterday for me Midwest Emo the manga, and I couldn't think of a more astute observation about it. The feeling of being stuck in a rut, the unrequited feelings, living with your regrets, big and small, the way the people in your life can just as much be emblematic of stages in your life as you are for them, living in a small town where everyone knows everyone else. Maybe it's just because that was the music that scored my early 20s, both in my listening habits and in the bands and the scenes I was a part of. But rereading the series for this video, I couldn't help but think of nights in my hometown spent in crowded garages dusted with years of cigarette ash, thinking, man, I want to make something special. Like those memories, I find myself growing fonder and fonder of Sing Yesterday for me with each moment that slips out from under